Hi, my name is Max and I'm a front-end developer at Specify Collections Consortium. Today I will talk about the User Preferences menu in Specify 7. User Preferences allow customizing the behavior and appearance of Specify 7 to be the way you like, but they also allow adapting Specify 7 for your workflow in order to save time and reduce friction. User Preferences menu was added in Specify 7.7 and we are constantly adding new preferences. If you have suggestions for additional things you would like to be able to customize, please contact us. So today I will go over individual options in the User Preferences menu, but I will skip the options that we already talked about in the Specify 7 accessibility and usability video. And if you haven't seen that video yet, I would highly encourage you to watch it before this. First of all, to open User Preferences, click on your username in Specify, which opens the User Tools menu, and here you can find the Preferences item. This page contains the preferences for all Specify tools. So the general section contains preferences that affect all Specify pages. For example, you can change the interface language, and we're looking for people who like to localize Specify to more languages. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. And you can also change the theme of the application to use white or dark. By default, it is respecting your system settings, so whatever you set in your operating system preferences. Similarly, you can ask Specify to reduce animations, reduce transparency, or increase contrast. And by default, it respects your operating system settings. Additionally, there are options to customize Specify look and feel even beyond the theme. For example, you can change the accent color to a different one and make it look and feel the way you like. The real nice thing about this is that user preferences are applying to the current user only, so you can change this to whatever color you want without being afraid of customizing it for everyone. And also user preferences are scoped to a given collection, which means you can set different preferences in different collections. This is useful. For example, you want to see this bar of blue color in one collection, but maybe green color in a different collection. And that is helpful for visually differentiating collections and making sure you're not accidentally editing data in a wrong collection. Next option is ability to dismiss error messages. And this is a very powerful option. So what it allows you to do is whenever there's a Specify error, and we try to fix all the errors and prevent them from happening, but sometimes errors still happen. And so you might see this dialog message with describing what the issue is. But most of the time you cannot dismiss that dialog, and you will be forced to restart the page. And the reason we do it that way is that we want to make sure you're not accidentally corrupting the data, because if there's a bug that happened and you continue working with Specify, maybe some record will be deleted accidentally, and maybe it will be overridden, which is not good. But if you feel confident that this bug or this error would not cause issues, or you want to copy data out of a record without saving, in those cases you can dismiss the error message. So enabling this option would allow you to dismiss all error messages across Specify. And like I said, it's quite powerful, so you should use this responsibly. Fortunately, we're going to improve this a bit in the next release of 7.8. We're going to improve the handling of error messages to make it a bit smarter, where if 7 is sure that the error message is safe to dismiss, it's going to allow you to dismiss even if you don't have this option checked. And some errors, when you dismiss it, instead of crashing entire form, it will only crash like a single field on that form, or basically the error will be isolated to a single component instead of affecting the entire page. But in order to protect from users enabling this option and not knowing what it means, not everyone is able to enable it. Only those who receive the necessary permission can do it. And the way to get the permission is if you go into, again, User Tools menu, and then Security and Accounts, and say I have this user. So I need to add a policy for them, for preferences, user, and edit protected, which would allow them to edit protected preferences like this one. It is protected because potentially you wouldn't want as administrator, you wouldn't want every user in your collection being able to dismiss all error messages and maybe accidentally causing some data to be corrupted. Oh, and this is pretty interesting. So 7 also now has an option to customize the home screen. So by default, the home screen is just using the Specify splash screen image. But you can change it to text and tiles. This site looks like. It's pretty nice, and you see the visualization of your entire text tree and how many records you have for each node. And you can click on the tile to run a query on that those records and see that actually like that many catalog numbers for this species, and you can like browse in forums to see those individual records. Yeah. Additionally, you can set specify to display a custom image on the home page. And here you need to put the URL of the image, and to get the URL, you just find any image you're interested in. Let's see this one, open it. Then right click on the image and say copy image address. So we copy that. And then in this box, we just paste that image. Yep, save. And now we have that on our welcome page. Also, we recently added ability to customize some of the actions for interactions. In particular, when you create a new loan, gift, or another type of interaction, you'll be asked to enter a list of catalog numbers to determine which collection objects you want to associate with this interaction. And when you enter multiple catalog numbers, you can separate them by a comma or a new line or a space. And specify tries to intelligently detect which separator to use, which not. But sometimes it doesn't detect the delimiter perfectly, or maybe you want to customize it. So you have this option here where you can say whether, for example, specify would use space as a delimiter, or comma character, or a new line character. So you can say which delimiters you would like to use when you're entering a list of catalog numbers. And what is more, you can set any custom delimiter you want. Like, in addition to this, you can add additional one. Let's say I want to separate them by a pipe or maybe a % sign. So it's very flexible. Then we have a lot of customization options for forums, because people spend a lot of time looking at forums. So we wanted to make sure that experience can be tailored to your preferences. First of all, you can change the language that is used by forums. As you know, Specify 7 now has a schema configurator, which allows you to configure the labels and descriptions for fields. And there are multiple languages already preloaded, but you can always add an additional language. And then in User Preferences menu, you can change which language to use when displaying the form labels. And this is useful for international collections when you have users speaking multiple languages. And then there's some convenience options like this, which allows text boxes in the form to grow automatically as you enter more data, so that you don't have to resize it manually. And there's also this very useful option which prints the name of a current record in the title of a tab, which is very useful when you have multiple tabs open, as it allows you to easily see which tab corresponds to which record even without opening the record. Though, as you can see, there isn't much space in the title bar. So in order to save space, you can check this option to not include the table name in the title. And in 7.8, we added the icon here to all the forms so that you can easily see which form you're looking at right now, even without reading the table name. But you can customize it to only include the icon or the name if you want to save on space to make it shorter here. And here are some more interesting options. So Specify 7 form system has been made more flexible than 6 in the recent update specifically. And now the width of all columns is determined automatically based on the content in that column. And this way you don't have to adjust and fine-tune the columns as much, and you can have it look nice without much worrying about form definitions. But if you want to make it look consistent with Specify 6, you can uncheck this option, and then form columns will match the settings you have in 6. And similar for subviews. So when you have a subview like here, the weight of these columns is determined automatically, but if you uncheck this option, you can override it with the custom weights you want. Then we have font options for the forms, and it is independent from the font options for the entire Specify. And this is useful because you can change the font size on the forms without affecting the font size of other UI elements. Like one use case is when you have long labels and you want to fit them on the form, so you can reduce the font size to fit long labels. And also you might notice that forms have a lot of blank space on the sides. It's so that you only have to look at the middle of a screen when editing a record. But if you want to better utilize the screen estate, you can increase the form width to something larger. And now the form is occupying more screen space, also here. Collection object and taxon forms have a Specify network badge, which allows you to see data about your current specimen as it is in aggregators like GBIF and Catalog of Life. And it also displays a map of all the occurrences of a given species in your collection and among other collections of the world. But if you want to disable this to have more free space in the form header, you can disable it. Now, these two options are quite important. So 7.7 release improved accessibility a lot, And one of the changes we did was to improve the date picker to be accessible. So this date picker is now fully compatible with screen readers and with keyboard navigation and with touchscreen, so it's really great. The only option is that it doesn't respect whatever date format you set in your collection preferences. It just has its own that is determined by your browser language. And for some people, it's not a problem because it still stores data in the correct format in your database, and it will still come out correctly in your reports and labels. But if you also want to see it in the correct format on the form, you can disable the accessible date picker, in which case it falls back to the previous design of the date picker. And same for the month picker, which by default looks like this, but you can disable that here. And numeric fields on the forms are justified right, but you can change it here by disabling it. Then we have useful options for customizing the search algorithm used by query combo boxes and other autocomplete boxes in Specify 7. For example, I have search algorithm set as starts with case insensitive, which means when I search for an accession, it only looks for accession numbers that start with this given string. Like if I search for IC, it will not find it because it's in the middle of that string. But you can change it to the contains algorithm, which looks for occurrence in anywhere in the string, not just in the beginning. And you can customize it independently for trees. For trees, this is useful for species, for example, where you may have a genus name included in the full name, but you're looking for given species, so contains is the default here. And then, as you might have noticed, when you search, it highlights automatically the match substring, which is controlled by this preference. Okay, for record sets, there is an option where when you open the record set, by default, it opens the first record, but if you prefer, you can open the last one by default. Yeah, I've still not decided which is better, so I just have an option here you can switch to whatever you like. Okay, then let's go to the collection choice, and these are quite time-saving. So when you have multiple collections, every time you sign in, it will ask you to choose a collection, but you can uncheck this, and then instead of asking it to automatically sign you in into the last collection you used, which is helpful if you use the same collection often. But then if you do still need to change the collection, you can always just pick a different one here. And in this case, I have only 4 collections, so it's quite easy, but some institutions, we have a lot of collections. And in that case, you really want to care about sorting them in some kind of order that makes sense for you. And so we have this order by field, which allows you to sort collections by any kind of field, like by collection name or maybe collection code or another field. Then for the tree editor, we also have customization options for the search algorithm, like whether it uses name or full name to search, and whether it's searching using starts with or contains, and whether it's case sensitive. So you can adjust the search settings quite nicely. And this is pretty cool. You can change the accent color for the tree. So by default, if you open a tree in Specify, you will see that it has this orange kind of background, but you might want to have a different background for some trees, which would allow you to easily differentiate which tree you're looking at right now. Yep, and now we have this nice night sky background in our geography tree. Now we're up to the query builder, and this is a very powerful option, and that's another restricted option, which means only users who have received permission to edit restricted options will be able to change this value. And what it does is it allows you to query data from absolutely any query in a database, including system tables. Like you can query users, query data sets, query record sets, query tree ranks, like anything you might need to query, you can query it when no restrictions mode is enabled. But you have to be quite careful because making any changes to system tables may lead to unintended consequences or data corruption. So that's why this is not enabled by default, and you have to make sure you know what you're doing before enabling this so as to avoid accidentally corrupting data. And then the query builder by default only shows you the tables that you have read access to. But if you're frequently editing tables that you don't have read access to, you can enable this option to still show them in a list. And then the query results by default are spread out quite nicely. It's a lot of space between cells, but to save some space, you can condense it, which would make the size of the cells a bit smaller to show you more records at once. Then for reports, when you run a report based on a query, all filters for all fields would be reset to empty value if this is checked, which is helpful if you want to specify a custom filter for a field every time you run a report. But at some point, we're going to extend the support for this to match the behavior in Specify 6, where you can specify this option on field-by-field basis. Like say, when you run a report, always clear the filter from a catalog number field, but don't clear the filter from the isCurrent field. And now there are just a few categories left. For example, the workbench. Workbench is not yet fully compatible with accessible technologies, but we're planning to improve that in the future. For now, though, you can customize the behavior of the editor. For example, when you open a dataset, you will see that it always has a blank row at the bottom. And the reasoning behind that was that it allows you to easily add new rows to the dataset. You just start typing and the new rows are created automatically. But sometimes it could also be unhelpful. For example, when you're doing a fill down, and it's easy to fill down one extra row, which results in unintentionally creating a blank row, which you don't want. And so instead of that, you can say that in user preferences for the workbench, reduce the number of blank rows at the end to 0, which basically means don't automatically create blank rows at the end of the dataset. And you can navigate through the dataset using the arrow keys, but you might notice that when you get to the edge, pressing the arrow key anymore does not do anything. It doesn't automatically loop over to the opposite edge of a spreadsheet. But if you would prefer to do it, you can enable these options in the preferences. Similar, you can navigate to the next column using the tab key, or the next row using the enter key. But if you want, you can swap the meaning of these keys. And then this is kind of a precaution. By default, you can start editing a cell by just pressing enter, and then you can start typing. But if you want to prevent accidentally editing data, you can disable this, which would then require you to double click on the cell to start editing the cell. This is pretty cool. So Workbench has a nice support for pick lists. And so for example, if you have a prep type pick list and it has a lot of items, when you click on the pick list cell in the Workbench, it will show you all the pick list items possible. But you can filter that list down quite a bit by setting this option, which would only display you the pick list items that start with value you have in that cell so far, so that when you start typing in a cell, the pick list items are automatically filtered down to only show the items that start with what you have so far. Then you also have an ability to export datasets by going to the Tools menu and clicking on Export, which would download the dataset as a TSV file in my case, because I have a export delimiter set as tab. But you can also say that you would like to export datasets as a comma-separated file, or maybe a semicolon separated file. So unfortunately, we don't yet support exporting Workbench datasets to Excel format. We also have a few options for the data mapper. For example, when you want to create a blank dataset without any kind of spreadsheet, you can click on this Create New button, and let's select a table. And here it says that this dataset does not have any columns. So in order to be able to enter any data into it, you need to add some columns first. So to do that, you need to press on this Add Column buttons, and then you can map columns to it. But if you're like a master Workbench users and you see this dialog all the time and it gets annoying, you can enable it here in user preferences. And similar, the way the Query Builder has a no restrictions mode, Workbench also has a no restrictions mode, which would allow you to upload data to any system table, which is very powerful. You can upload specified users, you can upload record sets, you can upload tree rank items, and it's still a lot of possibilities. But also with any kind of changes to system tables, you have to be very careful not to corrupt data, not to break database. That's why this is disabled by default, and you have to make sure you know what you're doing before enabling this and editing system tables. And this option covers an interesting use case. So often student accounts in Specify are responsible for cleaning up a data set, doing the mappings, but they themselves don't have permission to upload the data set. And Workbench Mapper by default hides all tables which you don't have permission to create. If I don't have the permission to create determinations, the data mapper would not show me this table here. But if you wouldn't actually be uploading the data set and would just transfer the ownership of a data set to another person for upload, then it might be useful to enable this option so that you can see tables without create access in the Workbench Mapper. Then app resources. Okay, this is a pretty exciting part. So we're gradually improving the app resources. And app resources, as a reminder, that's a place for advanced configuration of Specify 7. And the new app resources has a filters menu where you can filter down to which type of app resources you want to see. And then you can collapse the tree or expand it. So this should make it more friendly. And the editor itself now has a full screen mode, so you can see data easily. But we're also starting to roll out incrementally user interfaces for editing these files. The first one is the user preferences. So you can edit preferences for a different user. Like let's say I want to edit for this user here, which any changes you make here would just edit the JSON file here. And so instead of editing the JSON, you can just use this very nice interface. And like I said, we can expand this to also add user interfaces in the future for editing web links, field formatters, record formatters, and other things. And so for the editor itself, we have several options, similar to common editors, which can be configured in user preferences here. And finally, you can plot locality records in the dataset, and soon you will also be able to plot query results on the map. And so the map plugin supports several gestures like zoom in, click outside the pop-up, and some kind of transitions. And there's inertia when you try to scroll. But if you don't like any of this behavior, you can just disable the option. And that's it. As a reminder, if you haven't already seen the video on accessibility and usability in Specify 7.7, I would highly encourage you to watch it. And if you have any questions or would like to suggest additional user preferences we should add, please reach out to us. And thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.